We're in the BI platform studio, that is I am, and Donald Farmer, independent analyst and founder from TreeHive Strategy, in his office over in Seattle. Donald, we're going to talk about the balance between ownership and openness, and sometimes delicate balance between those. How would you define ownership, and how do you decide who the data owner should be?
Well, that's a great opening question. Thank you very much. It's ownership, I think, has got a lot to do with responsibility, not just a question of who protects the data, who manages the data, but who has responsibility for it. And ownership can be formal. In other words, somebody is given that job title. You are the data steward, for example. You are the data administrator. You're the database administrator, for example. You're responsible for this. But there's another type of ownership which is informal. If you're using the data, you have a responsibility for it. And increasingly in the world of self-service and more open architectures like data fabric, for example, data mesh, you will find that people have a sort of informal ownership of data. You don't have a job title that says you're the data owner. There's nothing in the company manual that says they're a data owner, but they have a responsibility because they're using the data. Sometimes they're extracting the data themselves with self-service tools. Sometimes they're getting it from somebody, but they have a responsibility towards it. So the traditional model of ownership being somebody has a job title and somebody has a formal responsibility, I think has to be opened up a little bit and say there's a lot of informal ownership as well. It's a sense of commitment and a sense of responsibility that I think is important here, rather than a job title. Does that make sense if I put it that way?
Yeah, it does. But you already mentioned self-service environment a couple of times. In a self-service environment, how do you ensure that people take accountability for the way data is processed and used?
Well, I think we need to train people, of course. They need to be educated in why it's important. In the past, we tend to treat people as if they were, we think the worst of them. What is the worst thing they can do? And then try and stop them doing that, We treat them almost as if they're have bad intentions. And I think it's very interesting that we take that approach because we don't do that in other aspects of business. When we give people a company credit card, they can go out and spend the company money, and we don't, there are rules, but the rules are not applied on the card. They're applied in the process, the procedure, in the discipline. And I think we need to think of data in the same way. If we restrict people too much, what happens is not that we don't stop them doing things, but they go underground. They start doing it along a different channel. They start sharing it rather than sharing the data properly through the websites, through the company portals, through the data catalog. They start putting it on USB sticks and sharing it around. Not because they're bad people, but because they're trying to do their job. So we have to make sure we don't get in the way of people who are just trying to do their job, who are good people, well-intentioned. So we need to do some training to make sure they understand the potential problems. We do need to have some controls around it for sure, and we need to have some discipline around it, but it's mostly about education. I often say that we have to change our attitudes from being data gatekeepers to being data shopkeepers. Once we don't try to prevent people coming in, we actually actively make data available to people and say, we want you to use the data, but here it is, prepared, packaged, made sure it's of good quality. And now that we've done that work, you can use it as you see fit, within certain guidelines. And that works very well. That approach works very well, but it's a different attitude. I don't want to pretend that there are not some circumstances in which you must be more disciplined. If you're in financial services, for example, there's probably data that you must be very, very careful about. If you're in, and there's always kind of personal data and private data that we always have to make sure we secure. But having done that, maybe in healthcare, maybe in financial services, or even, public sector, having done that, having scrubbed that data, made sure that that data is not going to be in the data set, then we can make it available to people. And I think we have to have this shopkeeper attitude rather than the gatekeeper attitude. It's more positive, it's more engaging, and I actually think it's in many ways more secure because it doesn't drive people underground to do it in ways that you have no control over.
Yeah, and what are some of the things you can do to promote the sharing of data in an organization? Can you give some examples?
Oh, yes, for sure. I mean, the biggest single thing you can do is build a great data catalog where people can find data, where it's well documented. And data catalogs are great for that. You know, they make it clear what data is available, who can use it, what the meaning of the data is, what the quality of the data is, and then people are encouraged to use it because they know it's available and they know it's already secured and they know it's already of good quality. So you can create a data catalog like that. There's been another approach towards building what they call analytics portals, which are they're portal sites, they're applications where you can go and see all your different analytics applications, no matter where they come from your reporting, from your dashboard, from your ERP system, from your self-service tools, but all integrated together into a single application. So there's one place to go. And that way you don't duplicate work because people can find out what else is going on. And there you can annotate the data and the analytics with information and a lot of kind of helpful guidance about how to use it and when to use it. And you can even build some processes around it, like workflows, to make sure that the data is handled properly. And I think that a data catalog and an analytics portal is a great answer to how to make data and insight available to people.
Okay. Well, you mentioned healthcare as an example.
Right.
But extended privacy regulations often seem to result in increased bureaucracy. What are things that organizations can do to avoid this bureaucracy, of course, without violating those privacy regulations?
Well, the bureaucracy is there for a reason. And the key thing that a business can do is to apply those bureaucratic controls as close to the source of the data as possible, so that everything downstream from that is now clean and suitable for use. So you don't have to apply controls after that. So what I would do, for example, is make sure that I may have a data warehouse for reporting. Now that data warehouse may have a set of controls over it, but sometimes those data warehouses, especially in healthcare, have to have quite detailed patient information in them so that you can analyze patient records, patient, insurance, all those sort of things accurately. But if somebody's wanting to do ad hoc analysis for marketing, for research, something like that, they shouldn't see any of that. So you apply the restrictions as close to the source of the data as possible. So you're only applying the bureaucracy in one place. You've only got one place to manage it. That has two advantages. First of all, it frees up people downstream to do what they need to do without worrying about it. And secondly, there's only one point of failure or only one point of control. And that makes it much easier to make sure you're compliant, because you only need to be compliant in one place and everything else should follow from that. Now, I'm painting an ideal picture of an ideal world. Of course, it's much messier than that in reality, but I think that's the principle.
Okay. Can you give us some examples on how tooling can help to prevent compliance issues that might arise in processing and usage of data?
Well, I think there's a number of tools available. A lot of cloud platforms, for example, will have, I'm thinking, if I can give a name, I think Azure is the one I'm most familiar with, but I know there are similar tools available on Google Cloud Platform, on AWS, which will scan your data and look for example, data which must certainly be private, credit card numbers, national identifiers, social security numbers, that sort of thing. But also those systems know about regulations. They have built into them knowledge of international regulations, for example. And so they can provide sort of advisory features. So that's the first place I would go. I would go to your cloud platform and look and see what your cloud platform provides. And then you can also buy additional tools, which are very specific for managing privacy. And so they may be identity management tools, which can be there. They can be tools which handle data residency. In other words, which will tell you where your data is in your enterprise to make sure that it's not crossing boundaries. So a set of tools like that. And then the last thing you can do is buy a set of specific privacy and security tools. You always need to make the distinction between privacy and security. Yeah. So privacy is about making sure that people don't see data that they're not supposed to see. And that might not be a security issue. It might be just that you shouldn't be able to see somebody's age, their credit rating, something like that. So those are really the three things. Look to your cloud platform, look to tools which are specifically dealing with compliance, and then finally look to tools which are applying privacy and security.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the interview, Donald.
Oh, great pleasure. Thank you.